Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Craig Taylor, and it is my distinct honor and pleasure to serve as the moderator for this morning's plenary session. Before we begin, however, I would like to just, if I may, take a few minutes to provide some opening comments to kind of set the stage for the discussions that will take place amongst our distinguished panelists this morning. Welcome. I think many of you know that the summer of 2020 represented somewhat of a cultural reckoning, as we saw millions of people take to the streets all across America and, frankly, around the globe to protest the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless other Black Americans. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic added another layer or dimension to what was an already challenging and deeply precarious environment. And in response to the tragic murder of George Floyd, we saw an increasing push by many institutions to make diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority in the workplace. Now, we know that the challenges created by the pandemic and the social unrest of the summer of 2020 really helped to bring conversations regarding DEI to the forefront again. I say again because you know as well as I do, ladies and gentlemen, that these issues have been around for as long as any of us can remember. DEI is not a new concept in the world of higher education. And if anything, the protests of the summer of 2020 really only served to shine a bright spotlight on many of the racial inequities that still exist in our society today. And in response to this deeply charged and frankly critically important moment in our country's history, we saw many institutional and organizational leaders who felt pressure to publicly acknowledge their commitment to eradicating the racism, discrimination, and bias that existed within their own organizations. And as a result, many of these same leaders issued statements, created initiatives, and pledged millions and millions of dollars to combat discrimination and bias. And so let me just close and say there are still a number of conversations surrounding DEI and a number of questions. What progress have institutions made? What are some of the racial inequities that still exist within many of these organizations? And how has COVID-19 impacted or adversely impacted our ability to advance efforts regarding DEI? This is a challenging subject, and these are very important questions. And today we're joined by a very talented and knowledgeable group of leaders in this space to share their perspective on these questions and certainly many more. Good morning. Let me, if I may, just take this moment to introduce our distinguished panelists. To my immediate left, Dr. Durriyyah Kemp serves as the acting director for Cook County with the University of Illinois Extension. She provides vision and leadership for social and emotional learning, investing in school staff, parents, students, community leaders, and organizations. In this role, she works closely with the School of Social Work faculty to focus on integrating social and emotional learning and equitable practices in K through 12 and post-secondary classrooms. Dr. Kemp also provides training in emotional intelligence, staff development, cultural competency, leadership, creating the foundation for systems change in multiple areas. Dr. Kemp also leads the NUEL's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Team. She earned 2 social science degrees from Michigan State University and a doctorate in higher education and organizational change from Benedictine University. Welcome. Next, we have Regenea Hurte. Regenea is currently the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisor for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. In this role, she is responsible for providing leadership and oversight for the implementation of a comprehensive DEI and civil rights framework that helps to build a more welcoming and inclusive extension and outreach. Regenea has a range of professional experiences, including work as a criminal defense lawyer, prosecutor, civil attorney, executive director, and legislative advocate for those experiencing indigency and food insecurity. Regenea earned her JD from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and her BA from Bowie State University in Bowie, Maryland. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Dr. Nia Imani Fields. Dr. Fields is the Maryland 4-H Program Leader and Assistant Director of Extension at the University of Maryland. Dr. Fields holds degrees in Business Administration, in Urban Affairs and Public Policy, and a doctorate in Urban Educational Leadership. Throughout her career, Dr. Fields' focus has been to work towards the positive development of youth, families, and communities. In her current role, she provides statewide visioning, leadership, and direction for 4-H youth development programs, faculty, and staff. Some of her research focuses on 4-H's contributions to social capital and the implications for social justice. She has created and coordinated several youth and community programs and initiatives within New York, Delaware, and Maryland. Welcome. So right now I'd like to ask Regenea, because we want to set some ground rules as we engage in dialogue and a healthy discussion this morning. Regenea, please.
Thank you. Good morning. It is certainly our pleasure to be here with you this morning, and as we just stated, we know that some of these topics are not going to necessarily be comfortable. I've already heard the word controversial used in one of the sessions this morning, and so I'll go ahead and jump on that. We may get into some of the spaces that might be controversial, and accordingly, we want to ensure that we are all going to abide by the ground rules that you are seeing in front of you. So we'll just talk about some of those. Respect. That is non-negotiable. If there is something that you do not feel that you can respect, I ask that you would keep it to yourself, because respect is non-negotiable in these spaces, okay? So we're gonna acknowledge the experiences of others, because what we need to understand is that simply because that is not your experience does not mean it is an invalid experience. My reality is my reality, and your reality is your reality. So then we go back to the first one, that we're going to respect each of our lived experiences, okay? We're going to take care of ourselves, right? We understand, like I just said, some of these things might be concerning, some of it might even be triggering, right? So please do take care of yourself. We are all adults. We don't need to have permission to leave the space. We don't need to have permission to take care of ourselves. So make sure that you are doing that in the space. I can't see. So we're going to make this a brave learning space, right? There may be some things, again, that you have never experienced or never had to engage around, but that does not mean that it is any less important or any less valuable to discuss. And so while there may be some things that do challenge you, let's look internally. Why does that challenge me? What's the concern? What's the problem? What's the discomfort that that is causing? And we are going to challenge ourselves first. And then if there is something that continues to challenge us, we're going to challenge ideas and not individuals. Okay? We understand that individuals are a result of the atmospheres that they are in. Our frames have been established before we even knew we had a frame. And so I don't know how many of you got the opportunity to choose, but I did not get to choose where I was born, who I was born to, the schools I went to, the experiences that I had growing up, and those things have become foundational. So what we're going to do is challenge ideas and not individuals. And finally, lessons leave, but stories stay. If we are so fortunate to have people who feel vulnerable enough to share personal experiences with us, whether that come from the panel, from our moderator, from our attendees. It is our obligation to keep that confidential. Unless that individual has given you permission to share their story, you need to keep it to yourself. However, what you can take with you and what we would challenge you to take with you is the lessons you learn from that. How did that make you feel? What thoughts did that give you? What new ideas? What spaces do you feel like you now need to go into because of that story? So we encourage you to take those lessons with you, but the stories need to stay in this space. Everybody understand? Everybody in agreement? All right, let's do it.
All right, let's get this party started. Good morning again and welcome. So just one housekeeping note. So we've got some prepared questions for our panelists, distinguished panelists this morning. And then after about 15 or 20 minutes or so, we're going to open it up to the audience. And any questions that certainly any of you have, you're welcome to address those to our panelists this morning. Okay? All right, so first question. What do you think are the long-term consequences or implications for institutions that continue to ignore or not fully embrace diversity and inclusion?
Sure. So we haven't seen these questions, so you're getting our responses authentically. So if you see our brains churning, it's because we are churning and thinking of appropriate responses. But we are seeing some of the results of the consequence, right? It's not as though we haven't been living 100+ years in extension and not meeting the mark when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're seeing the results. We're seeing the results in who comes to our programs and who does not, who funds our programs and who does not, who our partners are, what our policies are, and who they exclude. So we see what that looks like if we don't get it right. And it will get worse because the world is becoming more and more diverse, and it's requiring us to respond. We can't pretend like urban communities no longer exist, and we can't pretend like the racial diversity in this country is not increasing rapidly. So if we don't respond to what is being asked of us, we will no longer be relevant. We may not have a job, right, if we don't do our jobs in the way that it's needed. So we have to challenge ourselves to think of where will we be 5, 10, 20, 100 years from now, and how will we be relevant? And if we are only responsive to a small subset of this country, we will not be here because there will be no need for all of us to be here if we're not meeting that mark. So it's imperative, it's an expectation of us that we respond to these challenges.
Please. No one else? Okay. All right, second question. Despite the public declarations and commitments made by many institutions regarding DEI and the major initiatives they've established to address racial inequity, many institutions are still struggling to live up to the promise of greater diversity. Why do you think that is?
So I got you. Okay. So I think part of that is we need to get to a space where those promises and declarations go beyond being lip service. And a lot of the things that have been said, and some of the few things that have been done, limited of those, but there have been some, are intended to basically take the heat off, as I perceive it, right? To not become, a campus or an institution or an organization that gets directly in the line of fire, that is directly called out as it relates to a lack of action or a lack of intention. And so I think that until we get to the space where we are willing to take some loss of some of the things that we have illegally benefited from, right? We have to take off some of that. And until we're willing to take those losses, a lot of these things are not going to be able to accomplish because it's going to take some digging, it's going to take some unearthing, it's going to take some discomfort for a lot of folks to really get into the nitty gritty and to really understand kind of the foundational concerns that we need to be dealing with in the processes and the protocols and the policies that have been implemented forever and ever and ever to really make those changes. The worst thing in the world, and my Iowa State folks can tell you, for somebody to say to me is, we've always done it this way. I do not ever in my life want to hear we've always done it that way. Now, if you're providing me some historical context, maybe. But if I'm coming to you, if one of my colleagues is coming to you with, hey, we need to consider this, or that, and you tell me, no, we've always done it this way and it's always worked, you're lying. And I will not accept that. And so until we are ready to get rid of some of our comfort zones, some of our privilege, some of our entitlement, everything that, we say until we're ready to get in those spaces is essentially lip service.
Just to add a little bit to that, I think one of the reasons why we've had some failures is because of our lack of intentionality and our failure to really create and build a culture of evidence. I mean, we need receipts, right, for the work that we're saying that we actually want to do. And I think part of that really comes from how we define diversity, how we understand what diversity actually means, and what it means to actually embrace that, and I mean across all different aspects of diversity. If we only think about it in one way, then that's all that we're going to get. And so when if we only think about diversity in terms of gender, we may pat ourselves on the back a little bit too much to say, oh, this is a organization that has many women who are in leadership. While that may be true, who else is not at the table? Who else is missing? Who else has not had those opportunities, to ascend to leadership or be coached towards leadership? And again, it also just the way that we define it and being very transparent about what it is that we want to see, the changes that we want to see, the difference that we actually want to have within our institutions. Again, and just being very explicit and intentional about that. And one example I'll quickly share. When I first came into Extension, I was a 4-H youth development educator. I was a regional educator. And I remember having this conversation at a state meeting, and we were talking about diversity and the lack of diversity within our 4-H youth development program. So we were in these small tables and we were asked to, come up with some ideas of how we can diversify our program. The main idea that came out of the table that I was at was about getting more kids who are skateboarders and reaching out to the skateboard parks. Not at all what I thought the purpose. Again, how we define diversity, how we think about diversity really matters. And unless we start being very transparent and explicit about that, we're going to get what we've always gotten.
I love the culture of evidence. I wrote that down so I can use that. One definition that comes to mind when I think about this question is from Karen Pittman and others, robust equity. And I'll just read it to you. Intentional countering to inequity, institutional privilege and prejudice, and the systemic deficits that exist, and the intentional promotion of thriving across multiple domains of those who experience injustice. The words that stand out to me is the intentional countering. That's the piece that we often leave out. We are good at writing a statement and saying we are open to all, we've always been open to all, and here's how, that type of thing, without the action that accompanies those words. And my panelists here said the same thing. If you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan at your university, raise your hand, please. Right? We all are required to have that, right? We all have federal funds. We all have to add that statement to the bottom. How many of you, though, challenge the action part or know what the action is to accompany those words, right? We have to be challenging the action. We have to ask our administrators, or if you yourself are an administrator, ask yourself, what are we doing to make sure that these things happen? With some specific concrete examples. I happen to co-chair the Access, Equity, and Belonging Committee for 4-H, and we are in the process now of piloting an organizational assessment tool, and it's looking at 4 quadrants or domains: programming, partnerships, research and conceptual frameworks, and infrastructure on this continuum of inequity, compliance, transformation, and equity, right? And it's concrete examples, exploring those domains through those lenses with some strategies on how to move up on the spectrum, which is going to be a constant thing. We'll never just achieve equity and we're done, right? But it's a tool that moves us beyond the words. So that's the challenge I have for us all today is how are we moving beyond the words? What's the action and where are the receipts, right?
Thank you. Well, the next question, what is the best advice you can give to people, all of us, that are committed to and want to build an anti-racist workplace?
Nice. Humility is number one, I feel. I feel humility is number one. We have to recognize the role that each and every one of us plays in all of the isms that we participate in this country. And that's because this country was established by it. The country that we know today was established by the tenets of racism, right? Our universities were. The land that our universities were grounded in that. And until we reckon with that history and acknowledge our past, and acknowledge the role that we play, whether it's implicitly or complicitly in the story of racism and any other ism that we're talking about, then we won't make much movement. We're so worried about not being one of those people, right? Or not being a racist or not being the bad guy or of course I'm woke or whatever the case might be, that it might blind your eyes to how you play a role in that. And us just being in this space means we have some sense of privilege, right? We have some sense of privilege, and many of us also have oppressive factors with our identities because we have multiple identities, each and every one of us. But we have to be humble enough to recognize where we stand in this space, how we might play into that idea of racism or how we allow it to happen, right? We have to understand the definition of racism also and what that really looks like. Because the word alone scares people, but each and every one of us are a part of the story of racism because we're here. And we have to understand what our role is and be willing to make the change. And that might mean giving something up, power being one of them. If you really believe in equity and justice, it means making changes. And we even talked about it up here. This is the first time, and I love the National Urban Extension Conference. It's one of my favorites. And I can't recall, not that it's never existed, there ever being an all-black panel. Does anyone here recall? Maybe I just can't remember. Okay, so I've never seen it. And it's an interesting thing because we have all white panels all the time and no one might notice that that's a thing. I notice because my lenses require that, but not everyone would. This is a powerful moment here in extension because there's not many black people in extension. There isn't a lot of black people in extension. So recognizing the power of having 4 black voices on the stage to share our perspectives is a powerful moment. How often are we doing that, right? How often are we allowing that space and being prepared for the pushback that might come? So we have to think about how we bring equity to the space because that's the only way we, and being explicit in our language. Don't just say diversity, say anti-racist, if that's what we mean.
I think one of the things that I try to get folks to understand is that because we are part of the land grant system and everything that means, right? Everything that carries with it. But as a land grant university, our obligation was to extend and expand access in the first place. So what you cannot tell me is that doing diversity work, doing equity, being inclusive is extra. No, it's foundational. It's why we are here in the first place, and it's what we were obligated to do. And because we have benefited so much from the theft of the land, the taking of the land, the giving of the land, the buying of the land, however you want to quantify that, pick a term that works for you. We are responsible for doing this work, not only for folks that we like, that are like us, that see like us, think like us, love like us, hear like us, move like us, believe like us, but for all. And Iowa State University Extension Outreach, our mission and vision goals both say we are here to engage all Iowans. And that's what we are here to do. And we're going to take those action steps to make sure that we are doing that. And if it comes down to me as a team of one holding every Iowan responsible for making sure that culture and that space is available, then that's what I'm going to do. right? And I'm always so grateful for those folks who, work with me, who are great colleagues, who, get involved in my programs, who work with my initiatives, because they know it's not realistic. I mean, how many of our spaces, if we have DEI spaces specific to extension, consist of a team of one? So we have these expectations that are way up here, but then we have a team of one, and we resource them way down there. And so if we are really going to be dedicated to this and to creating workspaces, communities, cultures that are really going to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion in its full breadth. I know we're talking about anti-racist, but we also need to realize that diversity, equity, inclusion does not stop at race, ethnicity, and gender. There is a wide range, and then not to mention all the intersections that come along with those things. Okay, and how those things impact what it is that we do and how we're supposed to do. So if we're really going to do this thing, we need to understand that we are obligated to do it, not because NIFA said so, not because USDA said so, but because if you are going to call yourself a land-grant university, that's why you're here in the first place, is to expand access.
I don't have too much more to add to Nia and Regenea, but I will just say that I think when it really comes to anti-racism work, it's so important that we are willing to do our own work. I've always said that when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's really heart work, and you have to have a heart for people. We all should have a heart for people if you're working in extension in general, but it's so often we get caught up in working with the audiences that we feel most comfortable working with, being collegial with our colleagues who we feel most comfortable with, and not getting outside of that box. But to truly do this work and be an effective extensionist, you really have to have a heart for people. And so you have to do the heart work on yourself. And so when it comes to anti-racism work and really being intentional about that work, I think it's really just critical that we each open ourselves up to vulnerability. And I love just the power of vulnerabilities and what that can bring forth. You're seeing vulnerability, right now with us being very transparent and talking about topics like Nia and Regenea alluded to earlier. These topics can be very polarizing. And so but there's power in vulnerability. And when we're talking about issues like race, which can be very difficult, it's so important that when we unleash those vulnerabilities, then we all have some skin in the game, right? It's a little bit easier for us to be vulnerable with one another when it's not just one person doing all the work. It's not one person revealing their story and the other person just, listening and taking it in, but there's some sharing. There's some dialogue, that's happening. And so I think that just that power of vulnerabilities really has to become, at the top of our minds as we really try to be intentional about being anti-racist.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to offer one more question for our panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, and hopefully you have some great questions for them this morning. Universities tend to use the percentage of underrepresented students and faculty members on their campuses as evidence of their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Do you think that metrics alone prove that an institution is void of systemic and institutional racism?
No. Yeah, again, for me, it always comes back to being intentional about, when it comes to organizational change, creating that culture of evidence really matters. And then within that space, there has to be some evidence of belonging. It just, it has to be there, what it feels like. We all know what, when we walk into spaces, we feel a certain way about being there. And we know when a space, doesn't feel inclusive. And when you're in a space where you don't feel like you have a voice, or that you can even be your authentic self or really show up as your true self, when you have to, think about the words, that you're using, when you really have to pick and choose when you're going to engage, and, you have to be just very mindful. And I'll be honest, I'm oftentimes just that, very, very, critical of myself, of when I share, when I don't share, how much I share, the way I come across, and that sort of thing. I try to be very intentionally thoughtful, because I know in the minds of many people, I represent a group of people. And so I always want to make sure that I'm representing them, well, whether that's fair, fair or not. But I think until we really get to that space where there is, this overall sense of belonging and inclusivity, where we feel like we really can show up as our authentic selves. I don't think with us actually, counting numbers and really looking at metrics is going to matter if we don't feel, like we belong, or that we're, that we matter, I should say.
I couldn't agree with that more, and I'll share a personal story. So I'm the first Black woman as a program leader in my state, and I knew of one more before me in another state, and most of the diversity you see in leadership is with our 1890 universities in leadership roles in extension, particularly in 4-H. So I've been in many spaces where I am overtly not welcome, overtly not welcome. And I'm an adult who is confident in myself and able to maneuver in those situations, but we're asking our youth to be in those same spaces. So speaking to the metrics of what happens on campus with Extension, our constituents are across the state. They are youth, they are adults, they are communities, they are organizations. And there are many times when they overtly do not feel welcome by what they are called, by when they are not invited. And I myself had to question my physical safety in some spaces. That's not going to show up on a metric, right? And I may not want to even tell you if you were to ask me. I will, me personally, because I'm okay in doing that, but not everyone will, especially if they feel like their job is at risk, right? They may not be willing to tell you that they don't feel comfortable or safe going to certain meetings or certain events because of how they're treated or because of how they are ignored. We have to recognize, and it bothers me personally when we make statements that we've always been welcome to all. Absolutely not. Like legally we weren't. We were segregated by law. We had Negro extension. So it bothers me when we say those types of statements, and it bothers me even more when we pretend like it doesn't exist today. And we have to ask ourselves, how do our youth feel? How do our constituents feel if we ourselves feel that way in our own workplace? And we invest a lot of time and energy, at least on the surface level and sometimes deeper, in doing the work in community without looking at our own organization and how we as employees and colleagues feel in this workspace. And that's really critical. The Coming Together for Racial Understanding is a great program that really dives deeper into those types of conversations, specifically talking about race. But those types of conversations have to be had. We have to have spaces where there is some affinity for like-mindedness, because the trauma of me living in this skin and being in this workplace is real. And I use those words very carefully and sincerely. The trauma of being in my skin and in this space is real. And if we don't recognize that and wonder why people leave, then we'll never get to the space that we're trying to get in terms of the culture of our organization.
And I'll just add one thing very quickly. When we talk about metrics, we're really talking about a snapshot in time. We're not talking about anything that has any level of longevity to it, and often those things don't reflect how long people have been or how quickly they've left after, that said snapshot. Again, a personal story, and Dr. Nia has shared with us. Let me also remind y'all of the last point, lessons leave, stories stay, right? So this is not as it relates to extension. However, when I first moved to Iowa, I was an executive director for an organization, and I was there, and it was lovely. And then slowly but surely, it became very, very evident that the characteristics of who I am, characteristics that I can neither choose nor change, were impacting the individuals that I was working for. So I left that job. Right? Not because I wasn't enjoying what I was doing, not because I wasn't doing well at what I was doing, but because I was not willing to let my Black femaleness interfere with folks who were struggling to put food on the tables to feed their families. People come to work every single day. I'm sure, I'm going to presume, y'all tell me if I'm wrong. Every single day I got to think about what I'm going to put on before I go to work because I don't want to come across as being too militant. Every single day I have to steel myself so that I don't have a reaction that could lead someone to thinking, oh, she's just an angry black woman. Every day I have to temper how I deliver this DEI message. Now, this is my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. But I have to temper that because my state is what, the 4th or 5th whitest state in the country. And I cannot afford to have folks tune out. And so when we talk about being able to be authentic, that is oftentimes a comfort that we don't have. And the weight that comes along with that is frequently unbearable. So yeah, you talk about these metrics, and you might have that on Tuesday. Talk to me again on Friday, when these folks have had to live a week carrying that weight of not being able to be your fully authentic self, even if that's what they say they want you to do.
Okay, now we're going to open it up to all of you, and so I encourage you to take advantage of this wealth of knowledge and talent on stage this morning. So, first question. Yes, ma'am. It's not on.
My name is Julie. I'm here from Washington State University. And my question is kind of, I'm going to preface my question by a couple things. One is I'm emerging into some of this DEI space from like childhood experiences that are unique to me. And what I want to do is do as much as I can to honor you as Black females, because I'm fully aware that I don't have to work as hard as you do. I don't have to present myself with the same challenges to be accepted as you do. And so I want to honor you for that and the courage for standing on stage. And then the second thing is, I was really emotionally impacted by the plenary yesterday morning. And I happened to be sitting next to this gentleman. And this is for the rest of us, I turned around and just happened to see immediate segregation in this room after that plenary. And it broke my heart. And I'm like, we have to get down to, in my view, building those individual relationships. What was it Durriyyah was saying about truly caring, truly having that heart and understanding. Now, after that preface, my question. I know as an identified white female, I identify as a white female, I can use those two things that I just said and did as self-aggrandizement. And to put myself another step up, oh, I know this stuff, I've worked in this space. How would you suggest, I know there are places I have to stand back. I know there are places where I have to move forward, but I mix it up, I get it wrong. When do I say, you know what, I might know, but I don't know? And how do I say, colleagues, we need to step up, but not let it be about me? And some of that is gender related, being female.
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts. So again, it just intentionality, right? We have to be very intentional about what it is that we mean. And so when we think about systemic racism, particularly within our organizations, who's inflicting discriminatory practices or racist ideology or racist practices on someone else? If we're not intentional about who we are speaking to, who we're wanting to change, who we're actually, where we're wanting to see those changes at. So it's almost, incumbent upon you to be willing to step forward and speak to others in the majority race about actions that you're seeing, about comments that you're overhearing, about practices, and not leaning back from those or shying away from that, but instead fully leaning forward and say, we need to do better. We need to be, that change. And it really is for you, and it really is about you. Because the work that you have to do to change, it's not for me. And that's one of the things where we have to be, start having more authentic dialogue too about allyship and what that actually means. We don't need saving. We don't need anyone to save us. You do the work for you to be better. You talk to the people who are in your spaces and in your circles and say, we have to do better. Because this is something that has historically been perpetuated by people who look like me, and I want us to be better. Those are the types of conversations you have to be willing to, to have. Us, talking about, racism and solving that, how far is that gonna go? It's not the people like us. We don't have that power. And racism is about power. And so again, we have to be very intentional about how we define things, what we're saying we actually want, and then actually having those conversations with the people who they need to be had with. And until we're and it's okay for you I need to empower my people. You empower your people. Because that's where that change is really gonna happen. And we have to start being honest about where the work needs to be done. It's nice to say, oh, we all have, and of course, and sure, again, the vulnerabilities, we all don't have to have it all together, and we all don't have it, all together. But we can be honest about the work. I can be honest about the work that I have to do, but that's going to be very different than the work that you have to do. Again, we have to start having those honest conversations and being willing to talk about the work that actually needs to be done and the differences that lie, within that work. And that's where we really haven't, been willing to go yet. So.
Next question. Can I ask you to keep your questions to 15 seconds or less?
Right. Oops, you probably shouldn't have gave it to me then. I'm sorry. I'm known for questions. So I'm Lisa from 4-H in Iowa. And so I have a question, but I wanted to comment about the whole allyship because I find when I stand up and I challenge and I ask questions and I push, the blowback doesn't come to me. It comes to those colleagues that I'm speaking out for. And I don't want to cause more problems for them. So how do we navigate that? But my original, girl, I'll be in your email. I believe I've had meetings, but I'll follow up with you. But my original question was, representation matters, and we need more staff of color. But where I get stuck, there's a catch-22, is that, I'm asked to promote positions because I have a lot of connections in communities of color, and I am asked to promote those. I don't feel comfortable doing so because we have not done the work to create a welcoming and inclusive environment, and I am not going to burn my family and friends and personal and professional connections on that. They'll be, I will be ostracized. Girl, why didn't you tell me? So I just, where do we start? Where do we start? Because we can't get people in, and then when we get people in, we can't keep them. And so what do we do?
Great question, the story of my life. So I am very honest. In my role now, I am recruiting talent for 4-H professional positions. And there are many of times, I can't count the number of times people said, I was willing to have this conversation because I saw you. I did not even consider this place as a possibility for employment until I saw you. Representation is understated. I mean, it's a hashtag that we use, but it's so much power in seeing someone who looks like you or you feel has a connection to you. We cannot dismiss the power of that. And we do the same thing with our youth. Let's get youth of color. Let's get youth from no volunteers look like them. That is a problem. We can't jump the gun when it comes to these types of things. So some things that we're trying in Maryland are pipelines. We're partnering with, we have many HBCUs in Maryland, and we're partnering not just in our land-grant HBCUs, but creating pipeline and internship experiences. Cohorting is often helpful because you're not alone in coming into an organization. Having ally type of groups is helpful, and making connections outside of your county, city, or state is another useful tool. Having really authentic and well-developed mentorship programs is important so that you can cultivate and create a space of safety for folks who are coming in who may feel excluded. But like you said, looking at the organizational culture and seeing if you're ready for it. And if you're not, identifying specific things that are a problem, right? So we often focus on the theory or the statement and not on the specifics. What are the specific things that are problematic in our organization such that a person of color would not feel welcome? And not assuming, if you're not a person of color, what that might be, right? Asking people from that space what that looks like and what needs to change, and asking communities, why would you not, or why would you consider this place as a space where you might feel a sense of belonging? But creating systems to cultivate that is really important. Pipelines, internships, mentorship circles, and connecting them really intentionally to other people, not only within their state, is another support. You're expanding their support network. And being prepared that, they'll constantly need to be worked and need to be done. And when they're there, listen to them. Listen to them, right? So that they feel welcomed and valued and successful.
We've got time for maybe one or two more questions, and I want to provide an opportunity for our panelists to have closing comments. Thank you.
Good morning. Eduardo Gonzalez, Cornell Cooperative Extension. So I want to start with an attitude of gratitude and just really take in this historic moment. Seeing all of you up there is really incredibly powerful. And beyond powerful, I think there's another side of this, and that is that institutionally, DEI work tends to fall on the shoulders of Black women, and it's typically unwaged and unrecognized. So I also want to put that out there. So my question has to do with, Nia, something you mentioned, and that was healing. And so I have a great interest in centering healing and trauma-informed approaches into this work. And I wonder if you all might speak to that in some ways. In what ways are you centering healing processes or trauma-informed approaches to whether it's anti-racism work, DEI work, or belonging work?
Yeah, so I'll just start. One of the things I'm super happy of the group of people who are here at the conference with me representing Cook County. We are a group of people of color. I wish that there were more of, our majority race colleagues, would have attended this conference, but oftentimes that word urban, people think race. And even though obviously Chicago is a major metropolitan area, we still have, some of that confusion. But one of the things I will highlight is that with several of the people, my colleagues who are here, we are doing racial healing circles, and we are doing them. I had some of my colleagues, again, who are here, recently went through a training series to be able to facilitate these circles. And then others of my colleagues who are here will be participating in their first circle starting June 9th. And so with that work, again, we're being very intentional about sharing those lived experiences that we've had within Extension and external to Extension. But again, just taking that willingness to lay it all out there and have those true, authentic conversations about what it's like every single day and not shying away from that. And so we really wanted to create this safe space for us to have this dialogue, with our colleagues. And I shared with them some of my disappointment when I put this opportunity out there, that we didn't get a lot of individuals within, my county to step up and say, yeah, this is a great opportunity. But the 5 individuals who did step up initially stepped up with a lot of enthusiasm and say, this is incredible. And then we've since heard from other individuals around the state who are saying, like, yeah, we want to be a part of that. Can you bring this here? But that's one of the ways that we're really going to be intentional about working towards healing. And it's about being willing to listen to the stories, not to judge them, not to critique them, but to take, but to be able to take those in, and then also giving that vulnerability of yourself and sharing yourself, what your lived experience has been like, so that we too can learn, from those lessons. Again, I think those shared spaces of vulnerability have shown to be very, very powerful. And so I'm really hoping that it helps to advance equity within Cook County and beyond.
Very briefly, so I am less than a year in my space, so I've got lots of ideas and things that I have not yet had time to implement. However, one of the things that I always depend on is me. And as busy as I am and as many things I have going on, I also take on the equal opportunity role in Extension as well. And so I always try to put myself out there as a resource, again, to kind of have that space of, I'm free, I'm open, I can be authentic in this space and share with me. But then we take that to another level of, this is someone that has had this experience in Extension. As a member of leadership team, I take it to leadership. What y'all gonna do? What are y'all gonna do? Because it's not enough for me to be a sounding board. That might, yes, be helpful, for that person to have that space, and I'm always happy to be that. But I don't want it to happen again. And so I take that straight to leadership. What are we going to do with this? And so we've made different avenues, expanding our exit interview process, so that when folks do leave, we know why they're leaving, and we're able to kind of get the real on that, so then we can take that and learn from that, so that, whoever is coming behind hopefully won't have to engage around that same feeling or experience.
Okay, we've got time for one more quick question. Over here.
I got you. So, hello, my name is Michaela Elvey. I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and my question is around these receipts, because metrics do speak. And so what would you say would be like the identifiers, or how would you quantify impact in order to make it meaningful and communicate outward the work that you're doing in terms of developing this safe space of belonging? What would really be those identifiers? Because we do need that, how do you say, the proof?
Yeah, it's a really good, a really good question, and I think it's not one way, right? I think it's because this is a multifaceted issue and and problem, and I think a lot of those receipts will show up very differently. And again, we all know how we feel when we're in a space. And so a lot of those receipts are going to come from individuals' lived experiences. It's going to come from opportunities that have been created. It's going to come from individuals, again, being able to walk in a room and feel like I have a role here. I have a space here. This is community, and it feels that way, and that I can contribute in a way that is meaningful for me without having to, parse my words or think about my words. I think it's starting to show up for me when. I think it was Regenea who talked about, being mindful of what we wear and how we look. One of my colleagues, Michelle, who's here, we've talked about natural hair. And it's interesting that all 3 of us have natural hair, on this stage. But I can tell you that when I first came into Extension, I never would have walked in here with these twists in my hair. My hair was actually straightened when I first started. And it took a lot of internal conflict within myself to say, no, I'm no longer going to process my hair, and I'm going to wear my hair naturally, and I'm going to show up in every single space as myself with my natural hair. But it took some time. And then when I have conversations with my colleagues, they're like, oh no, we never, we never would have, we never thought about your hair. We never, you know, but again, sometimes the receipts are going to come like that. Me being able to walk in here with twists down to my backside, right? and be able to walk confidently and competently, as myself. And so some of those receipts are going to show up just like that. So I think it's going to be multifaceted. It's not going to be, just one way. But that sense of belonging and how we feel in spaces is really, really powerful. And it makes a difference in terms of retention, in terms of, coaching and mentorship, and just, quite frankly, just, wanting to be a part of Extension, in general. So I think we have to even think differently about, in terms of metrics and how we measure what success in DEI spaces really look like. I'll be real quick.
Real quick, just to add to that amazing reflection, storytelling is a powerful, and I think what Durriyyah was talking about has a lot to do with storytelling. Don't discount that as a metric, hearing the voices from those within the organization, but also for those, since we're in higher education, looking at the research and the conceptual frameworks that guide our work. If it's still maintained the dominant ideologies, we haven't gotten to the mark yet. So looking at what research guides our work, looking at what success looks like, is the word justice and equity for those of us in the tenure and promotion system explicitly written in our evaluations and our annual reports, looking at the systems that monitor what success looks like and what achievement looks like, what words are there and what words are not, is what I'll quickly add.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute each on a closing thought. I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to give you a question to send your thought around. What do you hope future generations understand about race?
Heavy, 1 minute. I hope that we recognize that it exists, regardless of how it was socially constructed, regardless of what we think it should and shouldn't be. It is here, and it has meaning, and it has implications on everyday people in our everyday lives, and I want us to recognize that. I mean, I could go on and on, but
And I guess I'll piggyback off of yours, that not only does it exist, but that it also adds value. It adds value to our experiences, that it deserves to be considered and celebrated, not seen as a deficit or a detraction or a distraction from whatever it is that I'm supposed to be bringing to the space.
we're not colorblind or cultureblind. Exactly. Just saying, so this whole notion of colorblind and cultureblind, it's a myth. So please see my blackness. I am very proud of it, and I'm honored by it, and I stand on the shoulders of greatness. So there's no value to the cultureblind, colorblind scenario.
One thing that I'll just say real quickly is that when it comes to race, it's so important to know and understand, as we think about race in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that only groups of people can be diverse. An individual person is not a diverse person. That makes absolutely no sense. I can never be a diverse hire. Only groups of people can be diverse. And so when we think about race, we have to think about it, across the spectrum, and ensuring that everybody, has voice, and that everybody has a space at that table, that it truly is a community of people representing so many different beautiful facets of life, and there is beauty in difference. There's beauty across every single race, and as a group, that's what makes us diverse. That's what makes us, beautiful. This is not a diverse panel racially, right? We can never be only groups of people. And I just ask that, as you move forward to advance the work in your respective institutions, that you keep that in mind, and how off-putting, that can be for racial minorities coming into an institution, being made to believe that they're the diverse hire. That makes absolutely no sense.
That concludes our session. I want to thank our distinguished panelists. Can we please get a round of applause for them? Thank you.